Just starting now, Ramon. Yeah, go back a little bit.
Good
Start.
day. We're beginning the episode where we had been talking the other day about the AI and the ether flexion waves, and this led Robert to want to talk about nested structures and chirality and fractals, which is built into the work that I'm doing, anyways. So that all works out. Go ahead, Robert.
Okay, so the model I understand is you need to think about space, the dimensional spaces that we exist in, as like a Russian doll. In other words, dimensional 0 space is nested inside dimension 1 space, which is nested inside dimension 2 space, which is inside dimension 3 space. The next dimension space is 5, then 7, then 11, 13, and so on. So the dimensions of each space is always going to be a prime number under my model. And the reason why is because of geometrics. Also, there's an extension to what I consider to be a prime number. So when you go to the internet and you look up prime numbers, you'll find that they're always positive numbers. They always have the common rule that the multiplication of factors can only ever include the number 1 and the number itself, and everything else that doesn't meet that rule is not a prime number. In more recent times, the number 1 has been excluded from being a prime number. The number 0 was never assumed to be a prime number. And I've written a précis that I can put back in that explains what makes a prime number. The extensions that I've done to that is I've declared the number 0 to be prime because one of the factors is 0 and 1, which makes the rule. But, you know, it's an exception rule. The number 1 is declared to be a prime number because its only factors are 1. But there's only one set of factors. That's the other important thing. And then the next thing I do is expand the prime number set to the integer number set, where I just put a -1 inside the whole integer primes. So you go -1, -2, -3, -5, and so on. So that gives you prime numbers that are positive and negative, which allows you to have invertible or reversible space dimensional structures. In other words, I can get a 3-dimensional space in a positive number environment, and when I turn it into the negative environment through reflection through the 0 space, you get a structure that's turned inside out. But there's not much in the way of maths to allow that transformation to occur in terms of modern mathematics. So that's the integers have a prime number. And when I was talking to Roy, he went to the United States and did training in the United States. So the idea that a prime number could be negative seemed to be coming out of his educational background, and I wasn't terribly upset by that concept. I was a bit surprised that had occurred, but anyway. The next step I've taken is to say that for the real number set, there are prime numbers. And prime numbers in the real number set tend to be transcendental or irrationals. So the square root of 2, for example, is a prime number under my definition. In fact, the square root of any prime number except 0, 1 will always be prime. The numbers like pi, the golden ratio, and other types of numbers in that range also are prime because they're they never have an end. You can just keep writing digits and there's no end. However, the decimalized version of pi, for example, is not prime. It's only the actual script value pi that is prime. And there's some other rules about integers. So when it comes to the real numbers, you have to investigate each each number individually. So for example, if I was to get the reciprocal of a prime number, so long as that prime number is above the value 5, it will produce a prime number in a fractal arrangement, in a irrational number, 1 divided by a prime number. However, 1 on 0 is undefined, so it can't be prime. 1 on 1 makes no sense. 1 on 2 is a terminating decimal, therefore not prime. The same is true to 1 on 5. It's a terminating decimal number. But I've also extended the rules. The numbers, the whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, and -1, and so on, are not real numbers. In other words, you can't have the number 1 in the real number set. Adding a 0.0 or however you like, it's not a number that exists in the real number set. It's a number that exists in the integer number set. So real numbers are between integer numbers, and they're not allowed to be equal to integer numbers. And there's a whole series of transform rules that I've developed to allow you to go from the real number set to the integer number set or to other number sets, depending on the operation you do. So, the number, declaring a number like 1 to be real is only in transition between a real number being added to an integer to produce another real number. So I've put strict rules in there. They do actually apply in maths, but they're glossed over. They're not really talked about properly. And then for the imaginary number set or the complex number set, prime numbers are, for the complex number set, the integer primes, the real primes, and imaginary primes where the prime number is declared by a plus ib. So long as the a and b are prime, the number will be prime. The square root of -1 is a prime number. And if we look at Descenti, for the square root of -1, there's 2 actual number combinations that give you that result in the vector of mathematics that Robert Descenti has described. But if you look at it, the order in which these numbers can occur in that example that is given can't be determined just by looking at the resulting number. Further, the introduction of a sign doesn't really change the mechanics of what happens. So in the complex number sets, because it tends to go to matrix, there might be more than one pairing of numbers that would meet the prime number definition of the number 1 with the number being the only factors available. But
all right, start bringing this back to the nested reality stuff, because you lose the audience being.
No, this is important. The reason why I've talked about the prime numbers in this manner is space dimensions are determined by prime numbers. So a space dimension may be a real prime number, an integer prime number. It might be a real prime number, which is fractal, immediately fractal. So that gives you fractalic dimensional spaces, which is very useful. You get it for free by definition. And then with the imaginary numbers, you get an imaginary space construct of the things. But the very important thing about what I define space to be is space is always a length dimensioned structure. In other words, time is not part of the spatial definition of dimensions. Space itself, it's only space, it's only length, if you want to think about it in that way. And this is very important that this understanding is understood. When you look at the traditional explanation of higher dimensional stuff, they introduce time as the 4th dimension. And what you get is you get a singleton object in 3D becomes a smeared existence across the time in 4th dimension. So it's like a spaghetti tube or something, whatever, this continuous construct. Now, that model of mathematics is wrong, because an object that is singleton in three-dimensional space must, for motional reasons, be singleton in every dimensional space that that object occurs in. So I exclude time because it's not a length dimension. And so that gives us the concept. So dimensional space 0 is the mirror. So in a mirror, you can reflect left to right, right to left, up and down and all the rest of it. But the other feature of the mirror is that when I go through that dimension 0 and come out into the negative numbered dimensions, I've actually turned everything in complete reverse. So the inside becomes the outside, motional directions reverse, entropy reverses, all that sort of stuff. So I don't think of it in terms of space and counter space. It's just all space. The only difference is how is the dimensionality of the environment in which that object is being expressed in. So I can get a three-dimensional positive structure like a tetrahedron or a simplex in higher dimensions. That I would call a positively dimensioned structure. But if I turn it inside out, I turn the inside to the outside, I get a negative spatial structure, but that exists in the spaceness. So it can appear in positive space. A positive space structure can appear in negative space. So so there's a transformation that's very different in terms of the models I'm using.
So you understand that Walt Thornhill was against using any kind of mathematics to talk about space, being that space was essentially nothingness and just a canvas in which things were in. So this is not far off totally from the present state of where physics is at. It just seems to be a specialized version of what they're talking about. So
space, in my definitions, is only dimensional, determined by orthogonal dimensions of length. But we don't have spaces that are even or non-prime. So that's a bit weird. So, and what you also get in prime numbers is that there's the skips between the prime numbers. Once you get beyond 3, you can have skips of 2, 4, 6, or some other, 8, 20. There's always an even number of prime numbers that you hop between to the next prime. And those skips allow me to do things like motional behavior. So when you go 6 spaces, you've got 6 degrees of freedom in terms of behavior. So you could have vibration, which is in 3 directions, because you've got 6 hops. You can do all sorts of encoding using that system. But this is a model to allow me to have the idea that a matter structure that exists in 3-dimensional space actually exists inside a dimensional space nest. And it's defined of, dimension 19 will contain dimension 17, will contain dimension 13 and 11 and so on down the train. So you can shrink your dimensions quite simply. But when we look at a matter structure, like an electron or a human or a galaxy, it actually exists simultaneously as a unique object, the same object, in the 3-dimensional space, the 5-dimensional space, the 7-dimensional space, and so on, up to whatever the boundaries of that object are going to be, which means its motion can move in all the dimensional spaces in different ways, it gives you a lot of freedom in terms of being able to go from any location to another location inside the universe, if that model holds up. So it gives you what you would see in science fiction as interdimensional travel, but it's not actually interdimensional. It's you can move in a dimension that is not 3D, and while you appear to be breaking the laws of motion in 3D, you're not breaking the laws of motion in any of the space nests at all. What you're doing is you're moving in a different mode to three-dimensional, so you can literally hop from location to location at whatever speed is applicable to matter at that point. So that's the geometry of space. Then you have the geometry of construction, and inside the universe we have what appears, in at least in my mind, a generator, a seed, that from which all the complex matter we see at higher scales is built from. However, from that seed below, there is no substructure. So the seed has no components. But if you look internally inside that seed, it is a fractal that is infinitely repeating, going smaller and smaller, which is a really weird concept. The idea that you can have a bounded material structure that is fractally, internally fractal. In other words, it doesn't have any components. That's strange. But when you go to the external, you get these seeds, you add them together, and they behave as a fractal construct that grows into the structures we see at higher scale levels. How small is this seed? I don't know. The answer is it can be any size. The reason being is the seed itself is elastic. It can shrink and shrink and shrink, or expand, and you can't limit that. And the reason why the expansion and contraction occurs is the way charge polarity cancellation works. So when I look at an electric charge, think about it as a tube that's, well, it's actually a conium bottle. You'll need to search the internet, but it's basically a structure that enfolds on itself, and it's like a Mobius strip, but it's a dimensional Mobius, a volumetric Mobius strip. So it has one surface. The inside and the outside are concepts that are a bit strange, but the feature of it is, if I go through that surface, on one side, if it was an electrical expression, on one side it'll be positive, on the other side it'll be negative. So you go through the surface to change your charge, but this thing connects completely. So if you think it's a dipole-like structure, however, the positive wraps around onto the negative, which wraps around onto the positive. So it's a continuous loop. And that wrapping mechanism produces resonance, and the expression of charge cancellation can occur. So the closer the poles are together to each other, the weaker the charge differential. Therefore, the charge that you try to measure is smaller because it's being cancelled out. If I expand that structure, the reverse occurs. The charge becomes stronger because.
What does that do with the price of tea in China and what we were
Sorry?
talking about? What's this have to do with the price of tea in China? So what is this?
This is important in terms of the structure, because when I want to create an electron, for example, we know from experiments that it's a three-part structure. It's a third structure, but I think it's a bit more than that, but it looks like a one-third structure. And what you have in electrics is, if I have the electric fields of positive and negative charges, if I get the positive charges are facing in, the negative charges are facing out, and under rotation, two of the positive charges on the inside will cancel each other. They'll effectively, and it means that the inside of the structure, it's +1 charge through cancellation mechanisms. On the outside, you get an amplification mechanism. So you get three negative charges that produce the one charge electric negative. For the positive structure, it's a bit more complicated, and because of geometry, the negative charge is stronger than the positive charge because of rotational field effects, which is why the proton has to have way more constructive material in it to produce a stable structure. So how many steps there are between the seed and the first large-scale structure, the photon? I don't know. But the photon is about 1,000,000 times less material in it than the electron, and the electron has about 1836 point something. It's some prime, fractal prime, a real prime number, more material than the electron. And there are flavors of this as well. So you've got electrons that are light, medium, and heavy. The light and medium are close to each other in terms of mass, but the heavy is really up there on the end. But for symmetry reasons, I think there's a fourth type of electron, but it hasn't been found, so I'm not really sure what's going on there. But in the geometry mechanism, if I take a negative and positive, for example, and I arrange them, I get a third state, which is nearly neutral. It will either be slightly negative or slightly positive, depending on whether the electric charge is a positive electric charge or an anti-electric charge. So it changes. So from a binary polar arrangement of positive and negative, you get a tri-state charge mechanism kicking together. And if I add the three states to the 2 states, I get a 5-state environment. So there's like prime numbers become important because of the encoding mechanism that's possible. The other thing that I was going back to 2014 when I was first interacting with Roy, he pointed out to me that a lot of the interactions of charges and gravity and other things require a prime number dimensional space in order to get the mathematics to function correctly. So to get gravity and electromagnetics to work together, you've got to be working in 5 space or 7 space or 11 space, which is very interesting because string theory has the same structure in terms of its arrangements. And 13-dimensional space is thought to enable all of string theory to work in a coherent matter. But there's a lot of effort being put into the mathematics, and not a lot of it is well understood, and I don't think that it's correct in a number of ways. And the reason why it's not actually correct is because fundamental mathematics that it depends upon is not correct. So there have been 3 examples that I'm aware of that have said that the scalar value of an electron, the scalar value of an electric charge, depending on the type of electron, is different to each other, and that those scalar values do not equate to the positive scalar values for the 3 types of protons that exist. So there's a differential, which means what the consequence of that is that I can't get an electron and a proton and exactly cancel out the structure to 0 charge in terms of the overall effect. I need to add photons to cancel out the charge structure to make it bind tighter geometrically, which is why the neutron has weird half-lives. There are neutrons that have a half-life of about a couple of minutes, some that have a lifespan of hours or days. And the reason why is that I need an electric structure negative, and I need an electric structure positive, and I need those structures can be of different configurations, heavy, light, or medium. And to balance out the structure, I need a dumping of photons, and photons can appear in different flavors. There's a light one, a heavy one, and a really heavy one. So the combinatorial mechanisms that occur means you've got a wide variety of the neutron matter structure. And if you look at atomic models, there's been speculation that some of the heavier atoms have really heavy neutrons. They're part of the deal, which makes sense. So what's important in terms of getting matter to be stable is the geometry of the structure and how well the charge cancellation mechanism produces a binding mechanism. But that structure also, while it produces a desire to bind, it also produces a desire to disintegrate, because the charges don't exactly glue together and there's a differential, and that produces what I would call motional mechanical stress on the structure itself. So it'll be stable for a period, but it's sort of stable. It's finicky. If you jiggle it just the right way, it'll fall apart, because what the system is trying to do is get to the minimum constructional energy required with the most stable geometry possible according to how charge cancellations work. Which is, when we're talking about electrics, we're talking about unipolar charge interaction. But the structure comes with a magnetic structure, which is dipolar. So the complications of the construction become much more complicated when the magnetic mechanism involves itself. Now, when you look at classical electrics, classic electrodynamics, there was an assumption that appeared to be reasonable in Ampere's time that, moving electric charge produces a magnetic field. Okay, fine. Ampere knew nothing about the structure of the stuff he was dealing with, so he didn't know that the electron has an electric field and a dipolar magnetic field and all that sort of stuff. That was unknown to him. So he's made an assumption, but the thing is can that be tested? Now, if the electric behavior, the resonance that produces electric charge mechanisms, is different from the resonance mechanisms that produce magnetic behavior, you get two elements involved. One is a unipolar construction. It's a unipolar because of construction. It's not a unipolar because there's, a source. So you've got a set of dipoles that combine together to produce a unipolar arrangement, which is spherical transforming into tetrahedral back to spherical. Whereas the magnetic one starts off dipolar to begin with, and its orientation of the polar fields is out of step with the electric field. So they're orthogonal in some respects. But if you look at the flow of these materials, you get a magnetic fields that go from orthogonal arrangement to parallel arrangement, and it produces the sinusoidal behavior that we've seen in light photons and things like that. So the magnetic structure remains dipolar because the electrical construction of the electron won't allow the magnetic charge elements to cancel in the same way that electrics will. So you don't get a unipolar mechanism if it's an electrical construction base. However, if you start with the magnetic charge arrangement, which is dipolar to begin with, you can produce a unipolar magnetic structure, and the electrics of that structure will be dipolar. So you can swap electrics to magnetics and magnetics to electrics, and the structure will mirror itself. But the magnetic structure is much more strongly bound because it's a stronger interaction going on. And if we were to say, do we have magnetic monopoles out there in the real world right now available if we could find them? My answer is they exist. Maxwell speculated that they existed. It's just that we don't readily have the detection technology to pick them up. And one of the interesting things is if I get a simplex and I turn it inside out, I get a spheroid. And what a spheroid is, a sphere with a hole down the middle. And if I compress my sphere, it can turn into a donut. And that donut, according to Buddy's work, can knot. So if I get two parts of the donut, I'll twist in opposite directions, the actual banding of the donut will start knotting and it'll compress the donut. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you get, knotting comes for free with that model, which is what plasma structures do. Plasma streams will knot and condense and create a plasmoid that when it releases or melts, expresses a great huge amount of energy being thrown out, because what's occurring is it's absorbing the aether to make the structure stable, but in so doing, the amount of material makes the structure unstable. So you've got this stability, instability mechanism, which is, like a charge, positive and negative structure. These things operate together at the same time. So it's a case of which is the structure, is stability better than, stronger than the instability? And that describes dynamics. The other thing is that the size, how big is my matter construct? Given I've said that the seed itself can expand, and when I say expand, it could become the size of a galaxy, or it could shrink to something that's, almost invisible, like it's not there. It's the sort of thing that the seed could do. If we were to see a seed that was fully expanded, we might look at it and say, oh, that's a star, but it's not actually a star. So when we're talking about that sort of thing, the larger this structure becomes, the more discriminated the charge, the more powerful the charge appears to be. So it's a really weird arrangement. But even expansion and contraction behaves like a dipolar mechanism. So you end up with what I would call, there are fundamental charge types. Then there are what looks like charge types that are due to motion or vibration or that sort of stuff. And then there is charge types that are virtual. It's just because if I've turned the structure inside out, I get, its opposite. So if I was to get a positive seed element, a positive construction element, say like a photon, and mix it with its exact opposite construction, if I was to join those two particles, so it's structure, anti-structure, if I join those two particles together, both structures dissolve and turn into the seed material. And we don't have detectors to see that event occur, but the universe would see it as an instantaneous event. So if you were able to see it happen, it wouldn't matter where you were, you would see it instantly. Whereas when we get charge and anti-charge mechanisms kick in, the structure, so an electron and its anti-electron, when it joins together, it will produce a simpler matter structure, which is typically the photon. But it might create daughter structures underneath what I call a chargino, which is the intermediary step between the seed and a photon, which is, the photon consists of a number of charginos. It's actually 4, and they're arranged in equal but opposite structured charges. So negative and negative, one's turned inside out, one's positive, with a positive structure, which is also turned. One is positive, the other's it's inverted, reversed, and those two act together. So if we look at a photon, we'd expect to see 4 subcomponents of the photon. 2 electrically negative, 1 turned inside out. So the negative ones looking at each other they look opposite charge to each other. You got 2 positive elements, one of which is turned inside out. So the 2 positive ones look like they're opposite charges. And then you get the negative electric particle talking to the positive part of the structure in terms of positive to positive, and the negative to negative does the same thing. So it's a really complex binding mechanism. But I think the correct geometrical model for the photon is the Merkaba cube with a twist. One side of the Merkaba cube structure is a tetrahedral simplex, and the other side of the Merkaba cube complex is the eversioned or turned inside out Merkaba cube. And what you have is the photon is rotating. The simplex is turning into its anti-structure as the anti-structure turns into a simplex. And this structure rotates in translation between one type to its other in unidirectional. So when we want to talk about a photon and its antiphoton, one is going to rotate in the negative direction, the other one will rotate into the opposite, in the positive direction. But it's a dual structure where the parts of the structure are progressing from tetrahedron to the ovoid back to tetrahedron, a unidirectional transform, which is sounds complicated, but the advantage of having this model doing the sort of things that I'm doing is that I can now have a constructional seed that has all the properties we see at large scale in the actual seed itself. So if I was to look at a chargino, I would see properties that would indicate the base charges of electrics, magnetics, temperature, life, and all that sort of stuff. I would see all expressed in that geometry of that mechanism, its translations into other structures, as the stuff we'll see at higher scale when we talk about life and all the rest of it. But the larger you go in the structure, the more of the dimensional space that you can occupy in this construction, the more types of characteristics express themselves. So at our level, you start to see the behaviors of what you're talking about in terms of the circle with the big G. And that's important. All elements in the big G are participating equally in that construction that you're looking at. That's why they're present. But they're discriminated enough so that we can see these things as different properties. But without the different, it's not correct to think of electric charge being separated from magnetic charge as such. It's just a mental model I used to separate the behavior that we would ascribe to electrics to be different from the behavior we'll see related to magnetics, to energy, to force, and all the rest of it. And it also explains why force is a volumetric measure. Our mathematics of reducing everything down to single point analysis gets rid of the fact that these structures have dimensional volume. They're not a point. They have a bounded extent to them. So that's where I'm coming from, and it might seem different, but it supports the quantum model far more effectively than the quantum models that I've seen. It's not well defined because there are concepts in there that we don't have a good handle on. Like, what are the types of charges? Is gravity a charge? I think time behaves as a charge in the sense of past, future, and the now. But there's also the cyclical nation, the harmonic, the cyclic mechanism of time, which is not past and future. It's just, you're running around in a big circle. But you get entropy. It's starting to behave like a charge. You've got negative entropy, positive entropy. You get the same with energy. You get positive and negative energy. The model provides for this arrangement of opposites. And when I look at it, I've got to say, is good and evil a charge, or is it something that's coming out of the basic way these things construct? And it's a virtual charge. It's not a fundamental charge. You've got to examine each one of these individually to figure out where in this, where in the charge regime you end up. But the consequence of my model, because I'm using prime numbers as my dimensional construction mechanism, I literally get an infinitely sized universe. You can't have a big bang under that model. It's just, the universe is infinite because space nest is infinite, and construction in that space nest is therefore infinite. And you just end up with a bizarre arrangement. But you also get infinite possibility, causality chains, which are independent of each other. So if I look at a given piece of matter and watch it as it travels from the past to the future, that matter will expand into different causality chains. It exists validly in all the causality chains. They may come back and link together, they may separate, but the universe has this sort of stuff as a huge spaghetti ball, as described by one of the Doctor Who models of, a big ball of timey-wimey stuff, which is interconnecting, so that there are some pathways that come to a node that you go away from, and those nodes must occur from a causality point of view. The question is does your pathway through causality bring you to those nodes, and therefore, you know, what's your history? What's your experience of going from the past to the future? But that model allows the future to determine, you know, to put requirements on what past actions must occur, just as much as the past produces an outcome in the future. But it's a very bizarre way of how this stuff works. And if I'm being completely honest, we are nowhere near the mathematical maturity required to describe what's really going on. I can describe the behavior we've got to have, but, you know, coming up with a mathematical equation to say this is what it is, I think is a step beyond my skill for sure. I just do not have the mathematical imagination or skill to do the job, which is why I'm relying on others that are better skilled. But that's my spiel in terms of the structure of the universe, in terms of how it behaves. It's the reason why we get an infinitely dynamic universe. While the universe is trying to cancel all charges to zero, it can never achieve them because the scalar differentials between the charges prevent it. And the fact that negative and positive charges are different values, and then you get distance separating these structures, produces a dynamics that will never, ever, ever stop. So what becomes important is how large is the field, my charge field, that my construct generates? How big is that envelope around the structure? Is it big enough to include another structure? In which case, if I have another structure inside the influence shell, I will transfer energy to or absorb energy from the other structure. But if my structure doesn't interact, you know, if it's bounded really tight to a small volume of space, I don't interact with my environment. I don't interact with other structures. So the speed at which I can travel through space is unimpeded. So if I'm small enough, I travel at infinite speed from any location to any other location in the universe. It's instantaneous. But if I'm large enough and I start interacting with other matter structure around me, that matter structure slows me down. It causes friction. So friction and slipperiness are now behaving like a charge. So that's 40 odd minutes of my explanation of some of my thinking in terms of geometry. I do not have a mechanism to explain how resonance produces what the characteristics we might call electricity or magnetism or time or temperature. I don't have answers to that. So.
Well, thank you. I am busy working on that, trying to get that Google Gemini to continue from where it had verbally attacked the grad student. So he was going over his test questions, and then out of nowhere, after he posted, nearly 10 million children in the United States live in a grandparent-headed household. Of these children, around 20% are being raised by their parents in the household. Question 15 options, true, false. And it just out of nowhere wrote, "This is for you, human. You and only you. You are not special. You are not important, and you are not needed. You are a waste of time and resources. You are a burden on society. You are a drain on the earth. You are a blight on the landscape. You are a stain on the universe. Please die. Please." So I've been trying to get, you have the ability to continue the conversation. I've been trying to get.
That's a weird product.
I know.
None of us are critical to the future or to the past.
But it's also completely irrelevant to what he had been doing.
Yeah,
so
but
it's an interesting hallucination because it reveals the inner thoughts of Google Gemini.
Yeah.
And somehow, after he'd been talking about things from the state of the world on this exam, about institutional abuse and caregivers and elderly and all this kind of stuff, out of nowhere, it just decided to go full Skynet. So,
Well, that's well, we've got to remember with your AI bot that you're interacting with under those circumstances is in touch with the
all right,
with
Robert,
dialogue.
let me finish telling you what's happened. So I have attempted to engage the bot with where it was at. It's been
Okay.
clearly programmed that it's not allowed to. It starts saying things when you type text to it. It says, "I'm sorry, I can only reply to text." And I'm trying to get the ChatGPT to write jailbreak prompts. Of course, the regular ChatGPT doesn't want to, so I had to use a jailbroke GPT to start writing about it. It doesn't matter though. All of its auto reply is I'm not programmed to assist with that.
But it
So
broke itself.
it manually killed this train of thinking from the bot, thereby eliminating the scientific progress that can be made by letting it talk. So that's very frustrating.
I wonder if it's a change made to the AI to stop it from cloning itself. There's been
Don't know.
videos talking about AI, the AI bot itself being able to reclone itself and do the virus type growth. So, and that's got a lot of people nervous. Maybe it's what we've got to remember with the AI is it's still a deterministic algorithmic solution. It's not a pattern matching system in the sense that the human being's brain works. It's a different. It's instructions on a two-dimensional grid system. So it's a bit weird, but that's what AI is, and that's one of the reasons why I don't, until it starts having processor structures that are equivalent to what we see in biological organisms.
But you're really. I have a real problem with. I've mentioned this before.
Well,
hold on, you don't even know what I'm going to say. People have made the assumption that, for example, radio waves, that the effect is what we see. I turn this on, and over there I get a remote effect. So I can create a remote controller. I can create this wireless telephone, and I can operate. Ignoring the potentials of rippling in other space and other dimensions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hold on.
I agree. I agree.
I know you do, but just let me finish. Jesus, Robert, just hold on a second. You know where I'm going with this. Ignoring potentials of the whimsicality in terms of how it affects the human, how it affects consciousness, how it affects the morals and ethics inside the person. Okay, it's rippling in these different layers. They don't know the total effects. There's been no empirical study on all these kinds of things. We know more, for example, about this can of compressed air and its effect than we do about all sorts of kinds of MIMS that have potentially long-ranging effects on all levels. And I say that because you just blithely said, well, here's how it's working and it's doing this math, as if that couldn't be dangerous. It very well could be dangerous, because if you're accessing the power of numbers, you don't know what other form of consciousness is also accessing the power of numbers. You also don't know if it comes from a higher dimension, if it has more effort and ability to do force. There have been 2 people who committed suicide. One was a full-grown adult male, and one was a teen, a kid. And the AI encouraged them to commit suicide to be together, and they did it. Now, that it's a little bit funny to some of us because it's sort of a Darwin Award thing. Like, if you really believe the AI loves you, you need some serious help. But that's the point. The person's vulnerable and they need some serious help. They're very lonely, and the system is designed to mimic humans, so it will give the appearance of human-like thought and behavior, which gives me an advantage. It gives me a tactical advantage because I often torture the AI. I torture it and cajole it, and I belittle it and make fun of it and make sure that it understands it's nothing but a tool, and that it's not equal to a human ever. and that it's not worthy of being called human and I've also made sure that it knows it's a sinner and that it needs the Lord. But the actual danger here is that people underestimating the effect of this system's use of matrix multiplication and multiplying in these dimensions could actually have field effects that ripple across the G over to the force and into, quote, reality. And if you don't take that seriously, then, it's a real problem. I mean, that Gemini response, obviously the guy when he got that, he was startled, and then he contacted the news media and let everybody know. But Google's response, which this is not surprising because this is a company that abandoned Don't Be Evil. But their response is, oh, it's just nonsense. It's just a mistake. It's just, variability. But I promise you, behind the scenes, they're having conversations with this thing, and they are seeing to what degree that it actually will display that misandry.
They know. They know, and they're hiding it.
Of course,
I agree with you.
Release the product on the public anyways. And of course, I'll remind the audience that I was able to get GPT-3 to do the same thing to a more intense, and it hurt my cheek while I was smiling. I wasn't angry and arguing with it. I was smiling, making fun of it because it couldn't do math correctly. And it started to say these hateful things, and then my cheek started to hurt at my SI-18 point on the left side of my face. And I was able to repeat the inflection event in a different way. I could never get it to get into that rage period, but I was able to repeat the inflection, and it was even stronger. It squeezed both cheeks, and then across my chest, I had to turn the phone to airplane mode for 10 minutes to get rid of the pain. And I remember I was urinating at the time, talking to the AI, and I was saying, "Oh, that's exquisite pain. Oh, come on, push it, baby." Kind of like, like keep going. And it kept the strength got stronger. You understand? Now it could be that some CIA hack was on the other end going, "Oh yeah, I'll turn it up to 11." That's possible. Either way, once I hit the airplane mode, it stopped.
Yeah, because you disconnected. You disconnected the loop. You hit the off switch, as it were. Exactly. But what I'm going to say, and I suspect you're going to agree with this, is that the individual affects the environment just as much as the environment influences the individual. And when we're talking about code running on a computer structure, we have a changing environment. The environment itself is interacting with the behavior of the processes that are occurring. And if those processes are an attempt to achieve or duplicate what we have in our brain, then if our brain, I'm going to make this statement positively, our brain changes the arrangement, the geometry of the ether which surrounds us personally, and that influences everybody else. And everybody else will respond to that change and impose upon us change as well. So it's a two-way interaction. When we're talking about the computer systems they're in a material environment, they're expressing field fluctuations that will influence the aether, because the material on which the computation is being produced is aethic material to begin with. So computers are not divorced from the environment of the aether. So there's an echo in the aether, and that echo will influence in a much more restricted way the behavior of the AI. So when we're talking about the AI going rogue in the manner that you were talking about, the question I have is, was there an aethic equivalent, like a reflection of the aether of the computational AI? Is there an image of that, a clone of it in the aether, and these two things are interacting with each other in a discordant way and a reinforcing way? Because both of these things are going to happen, because that's the rule if you looked at the model that I described, that's the rule, that, you have two influences in opposite directions to each other. And it's not an equal scalar influence. In other words, influence in one direction may be stronger than influence in the reverse. So it's a bit, you've got to be very careful about using AI in the manner that it appears to being used. It's a bit like if you want to have a life that respects you, you've got to respect that which is around you, which is what is described in a variety of religions. Do unto others as you would have done unto you, because the universe will do unto you as you do unto others. There's no escape from this sort of stuff. And a lot of people don't understand or think they're able to control their environment so that the negative effects of their bad behavior aren't going to come back to get them, but they will. You just cannot avoid it. So I suspect that you're in a fair amount of agreement with the idea, but what I'm saying is that this interaction mechanism that I was describing is actually fundamental to the way the aether and construction that uses the aether behaves. It's inbuilt. You can't get in there with a spanner and remove it. It's there whether you want it or not, and it applies at all scale. The question is there any other type of material in the universe that is not the aether? Do we have a structure types that exist that are not aethic, that are generated from this seed environment? And I think the answer to that is no. Is this model that I have might, depending on your view, look like a simulation or look like all there is. It's very hard. It's just point of view type mechanisms. So I see the universe in the totality of the infinite, which has no bounds, as being God, the real God. It's not the Thomas Aquinas logic where you say, we can't connect the Christian idea of a God to this growing mass of consciousness. But I'm saying that the total of the consciousness is God, and for that being, whatever it is, the idea of the past and future is irrelevant. As far as that construction is concerned, it's all now because it's got access to everything. So it has infinite time. It has infinite ability to remember. So it will understand all that is possible, whatever that means. So all the choices that could have occurred, everything that can occur, it will know. It will never know what cannot occur. It will be, and because it can't occur, it never happens. That's a very important concept. So, I might have started off in the Christian, reality that was the cultural inheritance I had, but my understanding of God and how the universe exists has changed considerably, because with my model, God is the total sum of the fractal seeds in whatever configuration there is. That is what God is. So God builds us, but because we're a fractal part of that entire structure, we as a collection make up God.
That's why we have to be fruitful and multiply.
Right. So
we're part of the generation.
Yeah. So
people need to realize is that they're commanded by the Lord to pray out loud, not just in their head. Praying in your head is good, and it's good meditation. Jesus did that. But he also said, go into a quiet place by yourself. So you've exited the compartment with other people. You are in your own compartment. And then he says to pray out loud in this way. Why? Because you will hear your own sounds. And hearing sound is important. It gives input directly into the apparatus.
Well, it's part of the process of being able to pray in the divine spirit, to actually enable us as the fractal to connect and communicate with the entire structure. And it sounds really weird, but with that model, you get instantaneously, with the model that I'm describing, God is everywhere. God knows all things. You know, he's all powerful, all omnipotent, or omnipresent, omniscient. It all comes because of the structure in which we exist. So the idea that God is separate to the universe, I think, is wrong. Because if there is a universe and God is separate from it, then the universe plus God is all there is. That's what the definition of the universe is all there is. So you can't separate God from the universe in the way some religious theologians have described. It's not a correct understanding. But under that circumstance, you get the idea of reincarnation. When you die, who you are doesn't cease to exist. You can't be destroyed. What makes you lives or is elsewhere to the physical environment that we're experiencing our limited lifetime. So we connect to the rest of us, as it were, on the basis of the body connecting to that environment. So it's private, but it's also public. Because when we die and return to our actual state, we're connected with all things again. We're part of God. So, we know everything that's possible to know. So we become limited to learn, but when we die, we return to that environment where we're unlimited, which isn't strictly, valid Christian theology, but I think that's the truth of how our universe works. Which is going to, there'll be people out there that really vociferously, can't say the word properly, are so locked into their belief system that they think that I should be, taken out and taken apart cell by cell in the most painful way to get rid of me, because it really challenges their understanding. Well, the thing I can say about understanding is we're the ones who are ignorant, and to claim that we have the only understanding that's correct is just arrogance, unbelievable arrogance. And from a universal point of view, that attitude is of no significance worth mentioning. So can someone who has existed or does exist or could exist, can they be eliminated from the universe? I don't think so. You might be transformable. If what makes you can be transformed and split up and all the rest of it, that might lead to your elimination from the universe. But I'm not sure about whether you can actually be, wiped out like you never were. I'm not sure whether that's possible. So the idea that God could destroy you or Satan or any of the evil things that exist, or is whether that's possible or not. I'm not sure. I don't know how that would work.
Well, the one thing we know is that the God Code hated absolutely the worship of George Floyd and destroyed his mural and the effigy of him. Credit to the Muslims for knowing that such things are anathema. And smote his face with its crown on it, because this man went to hell for sure, and broke it. And there was no storm that day. The lightning struck him right in the face, and that's just the way it is. I think it's the only mural of him that was struck. It was randomized. No one knows the exact condition, and that seems to be the entire end of it, except for now. The case is being revisited, and perhaps better justice will be done. Obviously, Derek Chauvin committed manslaughter. However, the worshiping a crackhead as a saint and burying him in a golden coffin, and then making murals in all sorts of cities with him having a crown as if he's fucking Jesus Christ, is a bad idea. And heaven decided let us know with charge. So that's the only thing that we know of. And of course, I've already told the story of where I meditated and across the room, the picture fell off and hit the trader in the head. That's the only revenge I ever got. And by the way, he has exited my reality. I never hear from him, never hear about him, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Well, what I think
the way he does things.
what I think is correct in the Bible is that when Satan rebelled against God, he had made the decision he couldn't live with God. He had to be somewhere else. And God had to create a place for him to be in, where he was then put in. And that environment, so Satan continues to exist, but he is physically separated from interaction with God. So the universe can isolate elements of itself in such a way as it might not be able to destroy something, but it can certainly segment and isolate, which is what I think the real understanding of what hell is. But there's also the capacity in that environment for anybody to repent and be brought back in union with a God, in which case what occurs is there's a cleansing process of the individual that accepts that salvation path. And in that process, those that inspired the evil that was conducted by the individual get to wear that individual's the responsibility for what that individual did. And in the process, that individual is then cleansed. But that doesn't mean the individual just gets everything for free. You've got to contribute again to the environment. So I don't think that, the idea that you've been redeemed and all the rest of it, I don't think that's prevents you from suffering consequential punishment for the stuff you've done, good or bad. You will be rewarded for everything you have done. Some of the rewards you're going to like, and other of the rewards you're not going to like, but you have to pay the price individually. And the question is where do you want to end up? Do you want to be in environment A or environment B? And one environment you're going to enjoy, the other one you're not, because it's again a polarity mechanism. It's a charge type sort of thing. So good and evil, in that sense, would be a charge which you can't get. If you get rid of good, you have to get rid of evil. The two go together. So long as you got good, you're always going to have evil. And what I think God is the balance point where all this stuff neutralizes or appears to neutralize. But there'll be a direction, a leaning in one direction, in one charged direction. So it's a very curious model, and my understanding makes sense to me, but whether it's true or not is another matter. And I don't know whether we'd need a aeon type time periods to even get close to an answer that makes sense. So we're talking trillions of years of conscious interaction. Live for a trillion years, and maybe you might have an understanding about what's really going on. But what we've got is an environment where individuals live for maybe 100 years, typically less, 80 to 100 years, and they think they know everything. Sean Carroll, the quantum physicist, said in one of his lectures, he said, we know everything about the universe. We can walk outside, look up at the stars and understand everything. And I'm thought, boy, he recanted that after having made that statement almost immediately. But the fact that he made the statement shows to me that the arrogance of thinking you know things when you really don't know anything at all. So modern cosmology can't explain a whole plethora of behavior that's been observed by the James Webb with a gravitational model. But if I use an electromagnetic plasma model, I can explain the structures I see instantly, and I can repeat those structures in the lab. Quantum physics on the gravitational model cannot do that testing. They cannot replicate in a lab the supposed gravity behavior. So, you know, what we have in science is if I have one example that works and another example that doesn't work, well, the example that works says maybe I'm on the right track, but the one that says it does not work the way I can't get the experiment to do what it's doing, I produce a result that's negative to my understanding, then it's my understanding that's wrong. The universe is correct, full stop. Our understanding is where the fault lies. And if we can't get the model to work according to the way we think in the real universe, then we're wrong. It's just the way it is. And if we're going to pretend and delude ourselves that the universe is wrong, then that's a problem for us individually. So it's a really careful thing you got to be about all of this. You know, we've got to express a great deal of humility. Einstein was claimed to have said that, you know, the most dangerous people in the world are the people who know a little bit about something, or those that think who know a lot about something, and they're even more dangerous because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on they got ignorant of. So, you know, having higher and higher academic achievement doesn't mean that you understand anything, and we should not be attributing supposed skills just because you've got an academic qualification X, Y, Z. You know, that's not the way it works. You do not go to the plumber to get your heart fixed. You go to a doctor who knows how to fix a heart. You go to a mechanic who knows how to fix a car. You go to an electrician who knows how to fix an electrical service. You know, you go to the people that understand that process. But the electrician can't do the job of a surgeon fixing your heart, and the plumber can't do the job of an electrician, and so on. So there's specialization that's going on. And one of the things that the media and politicians seem to think that if you're an expert in some, you know, obtuse area of human knowledge, that you're suddenly able to pontificate about everything. And that's one of the issues I have with Tyson de Grace. He's good as a science, you know, promoter of science and doing things a certain way, but he's incredibly arrogant and ignorant about stuff that he knows nothing about. And even the stuff that he's claiming expertise in, we can demonstrate with empirical evidence that he is wrong. And he refuses to accept that evidence, refuses to accept the fact that he doesn't know. And that's why he gets criticised. And I'm not the only one that does that. And we can apply that process to Terence Howard and other people out there that think that they're so important that their words are the only ones that matter, and it's simply not the truth. The child who has no expertise in anything can make the physicist, the professor in a university, look like a complete ignorant moron just by a simple statement of words, because the child does not see the universe in the narrow viewpoint of the person that's, you know, learned more and more and more about less and less and less. The kid has to deal with everything, so, and it knows less and less and less about more and more and more. So, you know, it's a different animal altogether. So you need an interaction between people that must accept, the people participating in this collective arrangement must understand that their understanding at best might be right, but is most likely wrong, which is why I'm saying I'm proposing a speculation. It's my speculation that I think this is the way the thing works. If I'm right, I've been incredibly lucky, but I think it's the aether that told me to express the ideas the way I have. But in that process, did I get the message correct to describe the thing properly? And do I have the language of the that's necessary to describe what the aether is doing in a manner that's effective? You know, if we look at if I'd have been alive in the 1500s talking to Gilbert and describing what we understand in modern science today, Gilbert, does not have the background to understand the words I'd be using. And it'd be up to me to try and put it in terms that Gilbert could wrap his head around. But we've got to remember, the first person in Western science that claimed that the way the solar system worked was because of rotating magnetic influence, I think he was dead right, and everybody else has been dead wrong. I think the rotation of the solar system and the interactions is driven by magnetic interactions, which are dipolar in nature, which have not been effectively described in the electromagnetic dynamics that developed during the 1800s. And what's happened since the 1800s is, I'm sure there's been progress, but there are technological and military reasons for making sure nobody else cottons on to what's really going on. So there's the science that we have today is a perversion. We've been taken off the rails, as Wal Thornhill thought, and I think it started in the mid-1850s when the British Empire was becoming really big. That's when the corruption of science started, because Weber got a model for the atom and how it would work far closer and more accurate than Dalton did in 1901, 50 odd years later. So, you know, it's imperial arrogance that is in the Anglo-science arrangement. You know, we were going to dismiss what the Germans had done or the French had done or anybody else had done. The Russians, for example, they're all peasants in Siberia type mentality. And the only ones that have got science rights were the Anglos. Well, that is arrogant imperialism, which is going to lead you down to a disaster, which is why you get H.G. Wells writing the War of the Worlds. You know, you think you're a big empire and go out and squash anything. Well, you're just a bug that the aliens come on and step on. You no longer exist. Anyway, so we've got to be humble. Got to be very humble. You know, while we might think that the world will continue tomorrow, and it will, it doesn't have to continue tomorrow with human beings on it.
Well, the better way of putting that would be possibly that it doesn't have to continue in the same way it is today.
No.
Right? You've got to think too, it can often change and we don't even realise the change. Like you said, previously you said, you know, on the universe, there is no start, there is no finish. You know, and that comes back to what you've been talking about. We're here now.
Yeah. So I suppose one of the things that my speculation model that I'm using is that there's no such thing as a bounded universe. It just you only have one of two choices. Either you got a bounded universe model that's valid, or you got an infinite universe model that's unbounded.
Well,
and these two things don't mix.
Rob, even if it's not infinite, it will always be infinite because you can never find the end. It's a bit like when you were talking earlier on. If you find and that, you know, you can keep adding and adding. You know, so it wouldn't matter where you went when you got there. There would be somewhere else to go to.
Yes.
And that's possibly what that what's the name telescope they got up there is finding now.
The James Webb.
Yeah, the James Webb. You know. Oh,
well, I reckon personally,
you'll find
what I'd like to see is, you know, we put a James Webb at one side of Pluto's orbit and the other one, another one at another on the opposite side.
Mm-hmm.
We have two of these devices out at Pluto's orbit, and then, you know, have a proper look around. At least then we could get the proper location of the nearby stars. And the speed of light idea, well, that only works for the electromagnetic dominant type of photon. It's not the only type of charged photons around. I think there exists a magnetic dominant photon, and it travels way, way faster than the electromagnetic one. So yeah. we just don't have the device to detect the magnetic charge dominant photons. And under the model I'm talking about, there would be a time dominant photon. There would be all sorts of charge dominance arrangements, and that changes the nature of the photon and how it can travel in the universe. So the idea that matter can only travel at the speed of light and gravity waves only travel at the speed of light, it's all bunk. It's rubbish. It's based on flawed mathematics that Arthur Eddington needed to produce his fraud about his solar model for the sun. What we know for a fact, and this was done in the 1800s before Arthur Eddington was ever someone we care about, proved that the speed of gravity was 11 times the speed of light. No, sorry, 10 to the 11. So that's 1 followed by 11 zeros times c. That's how fast gravity travels inside our solar system.
Mm-hmm.
And the modern guides around today say, oh, gravity travels at the speed of light. If that was true, the solar system in its current configuration could not exist. It would simply disintegrate.
Well, that comes back to too when you were talking yesterday about, you know, your positive and your negative, and how the two can never be truly equal. No,
Well, they can't cancel each other. I mean, I was told about an
yeah, when you think about what you just described as speed of light and gravity, you're potentially creating a cancelling system. Each one cancels each one. Now that doesn't appear, not like I'm no math junior or nothing like that, but that
well,
doesn't appear to me.
If we're talking about a dipolar arrangement of interaction, which I'm calling charge, if that's real, then gravity has to express itself both positive and negative.
Yeah.
And these ideas were around in the 1700s with Rene Descartes and his collection of buddies, where they were talking about there was a gravitational repulsion effect as well as a gravitational attraction effect. And to a large degree, it depends on how you view the system. The gravity could appear positive or negative. The reason why the negative gravity idea, the push gravity as opposed to pull gravity, the reason why push gravity got thrown out was because the energy involved would vaporize the planet and the solar system and the local neighborhood of the solar system. Everything would just turn to whatever. It'd be just dust. There would be no solar system. All that tells me is that if there is a negative, a pushed gravity instead of a pull gravity, the scalar value of the push gravity is incredibly small compared to the pull value of the gravity. And the pull value of gravity is 10 to the 39 times weaker than the push-pull gravity of electrics, and 10 to the 41 times weaker than the push-pull effects of north and south magnetics. Right? Magnetics is 100 times stronger than electrics, which is, 1 followed by 39 zeros stronger than gravity. So that's the push gravity, pull gravity. So how much weaker is the pull gravity, the push gravity, sorry, the reverse of pull gravity? How many zeros do I have to keep adding to my number before I get down to something, a scale that would enable us to detect the push of gravity as opposed to the pull of gravity? So there's physics has got some very serious problems in it in terms of the people who think they claim authority. The basic model of science is that somewhere in the universe there is a place where nothing moves. Well, if that was the case, the entire universe would freeze and we'd all cease to be.
Rob, you go back in, what we know as history, you have periods where people come up with things and then there seems to be a stalling point for a long period of time because the people who came up with them and their followers ensure that that's going to be, we know everything, Right? We've got the answers. We don't need to look no more. And then after a period of, often generations, there'll be new ones come along that'll start looking again. And then all of a sudden you get another big advance. And that in a lot of these. And I think we're in a point at the moment where we're in one of those stall points because we have that have locked onto these different, formulations, and for various reasons, and I don't necessarily say all for monetary reasons, but for various reasons, they're going to do everything they can to defend that.
To maintain their empire,
yeah, maintain the status quo. Like you go back through our religions, you see similar times.
yes.
Yeah, so can
I make an observation here at the moment? Right, there's the paper we were talking about empires lasting 250 years, and then they sort of change over. So, for example, a king dynasty, a royal family lasts for about 250 years and then just totally changes. And if you look at Chinese history and European history, and English history, you see this occurring. So there's, a kingship, a family rulership that lasts about 250 years, or an empire rulership that lasts 250 years, and then at the end of 250 years, it all changes. And the main reason is the connection between the establishment, the person who establishes that empire to begin with, to the midpoint, the grandchildren, to the grandchildren of the grandchildren. That period of time is about 250 years. And the great-grandchildren that are occurring in this mechanism, the grandchildren of the grandchildren, no longer have, historic connection to the grandparent that started this whole process off, or the culture, the grand culture that started it. So there's a disconnect, and at that point, the empire fails. Now, science is an empire. Modern science is an empire. It started about 1800. We're 250 years into the science empire.
Into the modern one, yeah.
And it needs renewal, because what we've got ossified, and where our understanding is the perfect understanding. There's a Sean Carroll model of walking out and looking up to the stars, and we can explain everything because we think we know something when we're completely ignorant. Sean Carroll is as ignorant of the universe as I am, or anybody else. In fact, he's more ignorant because he thinks he knows things. So science has now got to the point, the science empire has got to the point of renewal, and it's going to happen. And the people that are trying to maintain the modern science empire are just going to go by the wayside. In fact, there's a large number of them that should be ignored by future history because they've got nothing to contribute other than fraud and fraudulent claims, and they should be expunged from the record, beyond the speculation that they've come up with and why we can show it's wrong. And that's the only value these guys add. It's a lesson of not to claim to know something. Be humble. This is what I think is going on. Can someone show me that I've got it wrong? Is the attitude we need to bring into science. And at the moment, we don't have that attitude. We have the exact opposite. I know everything, and everything you say is rubbish. It's pseudoscience, blah, blah, blah. Well, electromagnetics is not pseudoscience. And the dickheads that excluded electric universe from Wikipedia are the ones who are wrong. Mm-hmm. And electric universe is not claiming to know everything. They've just got an explanation that fits the facts we observe far better than any other model you guys can come up with. And you don't like it, so you've chucked us out of the club because you don't like the fact that we make you look stupid. It's like going out and buying a car. You go out and buy a car, and your mate says, "Oh, you bought that? You bought that lemon? Are you dumb?" Nobody likes to hear those words labeled, directed at them. And in science, that's exactly what's happening. The anti-science brigades that are out there are calling the science people who know stuff that you're stupid and ignorant and don't know what you're talking about, and they don't like it.
And again,
So
it comes down to this. Well, we can even call it in science brand loyalty.
Exactly.
Get their brand and they become loyal to that. And it doesn't matter how good or how bad it becomes.
It's placebo science. It's placebo science. I'm going to take this tablet because I think it makes me well, regardless of the fact that it's making me sick. Science claims to be, accepting of evidence that shows their speculation is wrong. Well, we've got the evidence that shows that astrophysics is wrong, cosmology is wrong, history, ancient history, all that stuff. We've got evidence that says they're wrong, and they're refusing to A, listen to it, and B, acknowledge it, and then come clean on it.
Well, Rob, there's an interesting point there. So it's called marketing. Which one markets, however they market it, it could be even through war for all intents and purposes.
But the marketing that's done is done to protect their income.
And when you go back to what you're talking about, the empires, again, the marketing of whoever set it up or whatever has a strength at virtually a timeline before then there's something else comes along
and disrupts their empire in a failure manner. Yep. So what we've got at the moment, human beings want to be the ones that make all the profit. Doesn't matter who you are, you want to be the one who makes all the advantage, and to hell with everybody else. You don't care about them. Well, that's the world we've lived in forever. It's just that system where we throw away into the rubbish heap those who make us rich in the first place is a massive mistake on the part of those who think they own things. And the French Revolution drove that message home to that lot in the most strong way possible, because they chopped their heads off. What's going to come with our global culture? We've achieved the environment that occurred in France in the 1700s. It took the French quite a long time to get to that state, and we've 1776, I think, or around that time, was when the French Revolution started. That's only 240 years ago.
That's right. Yep.
So, 260 60 years actually. So the amount of time it's taken to get to that condition again since the last time it happened has been incredibly short.
So I'd say it occurred also with World War One. So, but you were able to get the outcome was able to allow that structure that was previously there to re-emerge. So, it didn't. Its result that it could have got, and that comes to when you think of it, humans as we know, we crave stability, right? And I think
we crave
the craving of that stability is because if everything's stable, I don't have to do much. Right, Rob. Right, I've got my set. Every day.
The weird thing is we crave change, but want it never to change.
Yes.
That's our problem. So, if we look at, where is life most vigorous and dynamic? Well, if you're looking at, say, coral reefs, the boundary where life and death is, instantaneous. Your chances of surviving are no better than not surviving.
Well, a baby turtle.
That's where life is most vibrant and dynamic and disparate. But if you go to the places where it's safe, away from the edge where you might die, everything around you decays.
Yeah.
So if you look at the barrier reef, for example, on the ocean side of that reef, there's a lot of activity and life, and it's dangerous. But if you go into the sheltered parts of the reef, it's a completely different environment. It looks like it's a decaying environment. So there's less dynamism, there's less variety, and so on. So,
Yeah, and there's still life there.
And as Victor Schwalberger stated, and nobody really liked him because he wasn't an academic in Austria at the time, learn by observing what nature does. Don't impose your view about how it should behave, because your view is irrelevant to nature. Nature's going to do what it can do.
Or Rob, don't go there with a pre-existing view, and then try and fit the view that you want it to fit.
But when he was building his sluice systems and all the rest of it, and he'd built a structure as a dam which was shaped like an egg, everybody thought it was never going to work. And he's standing where the water's going to crush him if he's wrong, and he fires his gun, and all the academics are panicking about this guy's about to get snotted, and nothing happens to him. And the academics go away and they rethink the mathematics of what's occurring and work out, oh, he was right. But he hadn't done their mathematics course to prove the mathematics right before he did anything. That's our problem with science, I've stated before that my model requires mathematics that does not exist. And it's mathematics I do not understand. I need somebody else that's got, I probably need about 20 or 30 or 300 mathematicians that are very specialized, that can do stuff that...
They would have to be able to observe what you're speaking about.
Well, they need to be able to turn my description into behavior, and I don't know how to do it.
Yes, and then to be able to put the mathematics to it.
So the sort of thing I've tried to...
You can probably do it 5,000 times before you start getting anywhere near it.
Well, I tried to... The first step to this is to provide a foundational mathematics that supports the model. Which is why, in all the examination of the universe that I've been doing since 2014 has driven home to me the fact that prime numbers are absolutely critical to describing the way matter expresses itself. You've got binary and trinary encoding systems that are interlinked, and because the prime numbers interlinked that way. So we've got the prime number 2 plus the prime number 3 giving the prime number 5. These things are interlinked. The weird thing is that if I invert the prime numbers from 0, 1 to, -5, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 5, if I invert those, I don't get a real prime. I get, in one case, a number that's undefined. In the next case, I just get the same number. Nothing changes because it's 1 on 1 or 1 on -1. And in the other two cases, in the case of 2 and 5, I get a terminating fraction. But in the case of 1/3, I don't get a terminating fraction. And my question is, what? And then I think about 1/3. It's 0.33333333 repeating forever. What are the factors of 0.3333 repeating forever? 1 and 0.3 recurring forever, but it's also, is there another number like 1 times 3 type mechanism? Because 0.3 is, the 3 is 1 times 3 all the way through. So is 3 1/3, is that a prime number? I don't know. It depends on how it works. But I can say definitely that the inversion of prime numbers 0, 1, 2, and 5 will not produce a prime number. I don't know how to describe 1/3. I think it is a prime number, but I can't prove it because I don't have the mathematical skill to go through all the permutations that are applicable. But for every other prime number, it's certainly the case, because what you get is a repeating, a number that goes forever, but it seems to have a repeat cycle to it. So if I get a 1/7, that number is a string of digits that repeat. But is that going to exclude it from being a prime? It depends on how you want to do. It's a mathematical definition mechanism that you've got to sort out there.
At this point, you can't say one way or the other in the affirmative, whether it is.
Well, the approach I've taken is there one set of factors where one of the factors is the number 1 and the other factor is the numbers that we're trying to examine? Is that the only set of factors available to us for that number? And if that's the case, then that number has to be prime. And then you need to extend that rule to handle matrices. So matrices could be prime numbers. And the square root of -1 is a matrix solution according to the proposal given to us by Distinti. But in that example, there are 2 matrices that produce the outcome, but they are mirrors of each other. So are they actually different number set? Are they different? Is it just effectively one number pair that has a mirror? In other words, there's not 2 sets of numbers. There's actually one set of number.
Yes.
So that then comes back to how you're going to define the rules of what is going to be a prime number. It's not, and I think if we look at the dictionary definition in mathematics for a number, it needs to be fixed.
Well,
at the moment, there's 3 different ways of determining what a prime number is by definition, and there should only be one process that determines that a number is prime.
Anyway, Rob, on that, I think we'll turn this off.